So we should keep our language clean too.
Full disclosure, right?
Yes.
Hi, Corinne.
I'm glad to see Melissa Wilson is with us too from Williamsburg.
Oh, yeah. Where's Melissa? Hi, Melissa. I live in Williamsburg too. And who is it calling in? We have someone at 413-587.
Hi, it's Michelle Dillman from the Northampton Senior Center.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm just going to change your name. Okay, I'm going to get started, and people may join as we're going. Just going to share my screen. And if you can all mute yourselves while we have speakers, that would be great. So this is the Age and Dementia Friendly Pioneer Valley quarterly meeting. This is actually our 5th quarterly meeting. And we're talking about housing access and homelessness considerations for older adults. Please put your name and organization in the chat. Then I have a few updates and announcements. If anyone else has announcements, add them in the chat or unmute after I've made a few announcements. Then we have Samantha Hamilton here from the Public Health Institute of Western Mass to talk about barriers to housing for men with CORIs. And then we have 3 people talking about homelessness and older adults. So special considerations for homeless elders. We have Jay Levy, and Tenancy Preservation Program. We have Jay Cove from the Berkshire County Housing Authority, and we have Lizzie Ortiz from Revitalize CDC to talk about working with at-risk elders. Then we'll have time for questions and discussion. Depending on how many questions we have, we may stay in discussion mode or go into smaller breakout groups. And then the last half hour I've set aside for anyone who wants to talk about implementation of action plans, if you're at that point or you're thinking about that point, and that's optional for anyone who wants to stay a little longer. So this is the Pioneer Valley region of Hampden and Hampshire counties with my little coding. The towns with the red hearts have been designated age-friendly and have submitted community assessments and action plans. The pink hearts are ones we're partnering with to provide technical assistance for developing assessments and action plans. The lighter red hearts are communities that have been designated but haven't done their action plans yet. And then the purple stars are dementia-friendly communities. And that's the latest information I have from the website. So if anyone knows different, please add it in the chat. So just some updates in terms of communities we've been working with. Belchertown had their age and dementia-friendly action plan approved by the select board, and they've submitted to AARP and Dementia Friendly Massachusetts for final designation. And we're going to be presenting to the planning board next week as the planning board is considering adding the plan as part of their master plan. So that's exciting. Agawam, Northampton, and South Hadley reports are in final review stage and getting ready for submission for approval. We've started working with Ware last January and started working with Hadley in July. So we're working on the assessments for those communities. And we also started working with Munson in July. And then Amherst is in line to start work in December of 2021. And we do have some openings coming up. So if any other communities are interested in getting technical assistance, please contact me. And then I will be sending out request for letters of support to apply as an age-friendly Pioneer Valley. So that would be designating our whole region as age-friendly. And the reason we're doing this is, there may be some communities that are smaller and don't want to do an individual assessment. This will have our all of Hampden and Hampshire counties considered age-friendly at least, and potentially dementia-friendly as well. And then we'll develop an action plan for activities we can do at the regional level. I still think it's valuable for communities to do this work at the local level, because a lot of the changes that you make or that are needed are at the local level, especially like, the built environment and some local services. In terms of dementia-friendly communities, there are currently 5 that have been designated in Hampden and Hampshire counties. That may be a little bit off, but that's what I recently heard from the Mass Council on Aging. Agawam, Northampton, and South Hadley will be applying for that designation as well soon. And there is a new online application for designation that was in a recent newsletter from the Mass Council on Aging. The process is a little different, so communities can actually apply for designation before they start the action plan or before they start the community assessment. So if I'm working with your community, we'll discuss that. Cities and towns that have already developed reports can go ahead and submit those and be designated. They don't have to submit this application. But the application is useful in it gives a list of recommended groups or organizations that should be represented on a dementia-friendly action team, which would be, in most cases, the same as an age-friendly action team. So that's in the application, as well as questions about how you plan to make your community dementia-friendly. So the main areas are raising awareness, educating the community, and making physical changes to make the community more welcome for people living with dementia. In terms of funding, the Community Compact Program is a really good resource for cities and towns that did not apply in FY21. You can apply with a best practice of age-friendly communities, and that allows you to get funds for planning or for implementation. And it's a really quick and easy application. So if that's something you're interested in, there's a link to the website here. I'll share these slides after the meeting today, or you can feel free to contact me or James Fuccione. They also have an IT grant program with applications due October 15th, and you can apply for up to $200,000, and that can also be for equipment that you could use to loan out to people. So that's another good resource. They have efficiency and regionalization grants that are open in January, and then municipal fiber grants for internet connection. So that's a new grant program open in March. Other funding opportunities that are listed on the Mass Healthy Aging Collaborative website are the AARP Foundation has funding to strengthen SNAP enrollment for older adults. The Mass Cultural Council has grants for $2,500 for fall and winter festivals. And then there's a Mass in Motion RFR out with a letter of intent due October 18th. That I know is a very highly competitive program, but it's something if a number of towns wanted to apply as a region, that's also a possibility. So and there's more information on all these on the Mass Healthy Aging Collaborative website. And one last thing, I promised James Fuccione I would talk again about the Healthy Aging for All toolkit, which is a really useful resource for doing any of this work. And it's a good reminder of what sectors of the community and various groups that we should all be reaching out to in all of this work. And So in the guidebook, it has a list of, on the left, of all different types of groups or sectors that you should think about in the community, including behavioral health, country of origin, people with dementia, people with disabilities, economic security, etc. And any one of these or any combination of these can lead to difficulty in accessing housing. So that's another reason why I'm bringing it up today as something to think about. I'm sure all these things will be coming up from our speakers in their talks. So that's it for announcements for me. I'm gonna stop screen sharing now and see if anyone has any questions or other announcements you'd like to make before we get started with our speakers. Okay. Okay. So if no more questions or announcements, I'll introduce Samantha Hamilton from the Public Health Institute of Western Mass to speak about a study that one of her colleagues did on barriers to housing for men with CORIs. Sam, you should have. Go ahead.
I'm here, Vicki. So hello, everyone. So I think I've been on the campaign around older adults and CORIs. I've shared it when we talked with James's group. I'm also on the board with him for equity and aging. But I wanted to share this presentation. This is a draft presentation. We have a final product coming out and hopefully a community conversation or community event at this point, probably virtually due to the pandemic, happening to talk about older adults and CORI. So it's a health impact assessment report conducted by my colleague, Kimberly Gilhooly. She's no longer working at PHI, but she's consulting with us to finalize this report, our slides, and kind of just wrapping it all up for us to kind of share with the community what we've learned. So bear with me as I'm speaking on behalf of Kim, and some of the acronyms I might not know, but hopefully you still get the fuller picture. So we were granted funding to do a health impact assessment, and the steps taken to kind of assess the health indicators related to older adults around CORIs were to do a screening process to determine the need or the value of this assessment, scoping to identify the health impact evaluation and methodology we're going to use, assessments, recommendations, and a report. So this is a kind of a summary of the full assessment and the recommendations that we would be encouraging to be pushed forward. And the final report should be ready by the end of October. And our hopes is to do, again, a community conversation, a community event, probably not in person at this point. And the report will be out on the PHI website, as well as available for some possible hard copies. So what we had to consider in this assessment to understanding the need was these research questions. What would be the health and equity impact in housing providers if housing providers changed their practices or policies around the use of a criminal background check for older adults? So if that was no longer a factor in determining housing tenancy. Other questions to consider is what did we hear from did we find compelling or surprising from your experience, if there's anything that's incorrect? So what did we find out in this assessment process that was surprising? So the assessment methodology included reviewing lecture reviews. We had a hybrid survey / interview with 39 older adults in Hampden County who have lived experience to the barriers of housing due to their criminal record. We did key informant interviews with 4 housing authorities plus Boston Housing Authority, as well as a housing authority in Illinois. We had local and state service providers, reentry programs, behavioral health and homelessness organizations that we interviewed and had these conversations with, state agencies, as well as advocacy groups like legal aid, criminal justice reform, and housing advocacies. So there was also secondary data from housing providers like the Hampden County Sheriff's Department and the Mass Department of Corrections. So they all provided input into this assessment. So some background knowledge based on our findings. We know that there's a significant amount of folks that leave jail and they re-enter back into Hampden County. So about 1,600 people annually over the age of 18 return to Hampden County from jail, prison, or on probation. So we have kind of like a swarm of community folks coming back into our area. We include all these over 18s in our survey. So we wanted to consider the folks that were over that age. And what we learned is that people over the age of 50 plus were not at a higher risk. We're at a higher risk for homelessness and homeless instability. They were a low risk of recidivism. So the percentage of which they would commit a crime again was around 3%, compared to a younger person between the ages of, say, 18 to 25, which was 30% likely. And they experienced extreme low income. So week one of being released, the likelihood of having unstable housing is 70%, and it continues to be high after 6 months after release. So those are some of the understanding. I'm also going to be skipping around these slides as there's a lot of content here, but we wanted to kind of give some foundation about what we're doing. So regarding incarceration, mass incarceration had led to disproportionate representation for Black and Latinx populations in the jails and prisons. So disproportionately, communities of color and Latinx communities are more likely to be incarcerated. And that trend has stayed consistent over the years. So that's a reflection on issues of systemic racism and oppression, that more communities of color are the ones being incarcerated. When it comes to mass incarceration, that again, this is another slide that kind of shares a disproportionate representation of Black and Latinx populations who are homeless and have unstable housing. So people who have been incarcerated are up to 11 times more likely to experience homelessness than people who have not been incarcerated. And you can see the relationship based on ethnicity, 20% African Americans or Blacks, 56% Latinx, compared to counterparts, white, which is 22%. I'm going to move on to talking about the priority factors that are around social determinants of health related to incarceration. And access to affordable housing, why is it important? Having stable housing has a significant impact on our mental health and our stability. So serious mental health illnesses, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, misuse, self-harm, and suicide all showed up at a higher rates among people who are homeless than the general population. With older homelessness, men are at a higher risk of suicide. Again, this kind of speaks to the importance of having stable housing. For certain community groups, it does significantly affect their mental health and well-being. And older people who are homeless tend to exhibit health characteristics that are more consistent with non-homeless people approximately 100 years older than them. So they're feeling the burden and the stress of homelessness, and their health is being impacted by it. So those are some of the health indicators. Okay, so we also learned about the improvements in the criminal legal system. Why is that important? So the improvement in the criminal legal system has dramatically affected on our mental health and our physical health. People with records are at a higher risk of unstable housing, homelessness, and further involvement in the criminal legal system. Again, these are just kind of social determinant factors that kind of compile with the need to do something different regarding the impacts around older adults and access. I'm going to skip towards the policy and practices. We wanted to kind of set a charter to kind of figure out what policies and practice would have the most impact in addressing the barriers for older adults with CORIs. So these policies that we would consider changing was limiting the use of CORIs in the housing application decision as a deciding factor for housing, establishing formal partnerships with housing providers and reentries, behavioral health organizations, and homeless reduction programs. So building that bridge in which when someone comes out of incarceration, they have a support resource that would help them find access and have support. Allowing mitigating circumstances to be considered before denial. So someone could explain to the folks at the Housing Authority that maybe this incident was a long time ago, that they said the incident was unintentional, was an accident. So it's to the discretion then of the Housing Authority whether they would consider that a factor to still allow the person to have tenancy in one of their units. So the charts, the bubble chart shows that what Housing Authority, Springfield Housing Authority, Holyoke, Chicopee were actually practicing these policies or partially practicing these policies to address the needs of older adults. And one of the other findings or possibilities could be permitting family members to house people with a CORI in their home. So that's another factor in saying if the person has subsidized housing through the Housing Authority, would they allow a family member to live with them instead of that family member seeking housing on their own? So those are the kind of the studies that we kind of explore to find out what existed in when it comes to the Housing Authority, what could be changed, and what could be different. So at the end of this report, and I said this is a very complex report, we came to the following recommendations, and it's further explained in the full report. So we recommended expanding funding for partner organizations, as mentioned before, to provide services and housing providers. So piloting programs that bridge the gap for folks to have access to kind of like a transitional program when they would leave out of the jail and go into reentry housing support programs. Have local housing authorities change practices, considering age 50 plus as an automatic mitigated circumstance, or for someone to say, well, they're less likely to commit any crime, so they could be considered to have access to housing and tenancy. So improve training on how to read a CORI and fair hearings. So that's a consideration of practices that could be changed within the Housing Authority. Consider mitigating circumstances prior to denial. So again, those are some factors that we were kind of highlighting. And for the criminal legal system, do a better job of a reentry plan so people have more secure housing plans. And that might just require more funding to address the issue when it comes to supporting diverse communities with reentering back into the community. And you can see the other recommendations below. And our plan going forward with this final report is to have this report, finalize the report, and then disseminate the report back out into the community through the agencies that we've already talked to. So we've talked to 25 agencies and organizations. We want to go back out to them with our final report, just say, here's what we've learned, and then ask them what would they consider changing it within their organization or practice to address the issue. Have community meetings with the people that we surveyed, the 39 folks that did participate, just to, again, share back what we learned, and also equip them with resources like legal aid services or other advocacy groups that could work with them if they're still dealing with the barrier of addressing the needs of CORIs. So we're in the midst of, that's the end of my slides, we're in the midst of taking this information, teaching, sharing it back, and then asking what is possible. The biggest factor is that an older adult is not a risk factor when it comes to a CORI. They are not going to be the ones committing future crime. But if they have open CORI, they will not have access to housing. And that perpetuates them from having issues with housing and possibly making it possible for them to be homeless. Also, we've learned that, the life expectancy in our region, depending on where you live, varies by zip code. And I always share the analogy that in Springfield, 0119 zip code tends to live to 75. And that could be based on health, access issues. So if someone has been incarcerated for about 10 to 15 years, they get out when they're 50, they have a CORI that prevents them from being sealed for the next 10 years. They're 60. Once that is resolved, they have 15 years left to have a decent life. And to start over, knowing that, you don't have the life expectancy limits people's ability to age well. And that's kind of the reality of the box we're in, that most folks are starting over, and the barriers of having a CORI record makes it harder for them to have a healthy start. And our biggest factor in starting over is housing and employment. And a CORI is kind of like blanketed to both of these things. So that's where we are. And, we're looking forward to kind of just look at this as an equity issue and how we can resolve it in Springfield.
Thanks, Samantha. Corinne had a message in the chat. Would housing authorities need permission from Mass Dhcd to change policies? So that's something I was wondering as well. Do local housing authorities set their own policies, or is it, depending on their funding source, do they have to comply with state or federal?
I think from my understanding, without having Kim's awesome knowledge here, they're following state regulations, but it's a blanketed statement on a CORI is used. So there is discretion there. And that's why talking to the individual housing authorities, they have now the authority to say how much still complies with the general state federal regulations and don't conflict. So without saying yay or nay, I think that's something I could bring back to Kim to get some clarity on to give it a better answer. But there's power within local authorities to kind of consider different things. My surprising finding is that in this research, there is no correlation in the research that says having a criminal record determines whether you are going to be a good or a bad tenant. So there is no correlation that said more tenants that have criminal records are bad tenants versus the ones that don't. So if there's no relationship between the two, why are we still using these measurements? And it's just been done for so long, people have not questioned it. The other piece of what we're doing is compiling the voices of older adults that have lived experiences. And without taking up any more of today's meeting, I do have interviews with older adults who said like this barrier it was devastating to their whole life. They had to start over. They had to move and live with family. And if those supports weren't in place, whether like family members had housed on their own separate out of the housing authority, they would be struggling to start over. They had to separate from family. The career path they wanted had to shift because that criminal record followed them in employment as well as in housing. So that's the other piece of this that will be added in our final presentation is the voice of real adults, older adults, years later, just reflecting on how impactful dealing with the CORI had on their life.
Wow, thank you.
I could add something, Becky.
Sure, go ahead.
Jay Levy. It's even more dire in some ways. I love what Samantha presented. I think it's awesome. And in some ways, it's more dire because not only are people who are, let's say, in housing authorities who are welcoming or trying to keep their son or daughter safe and welcoming them into a place, it's an adult son or daughter, and then that's not being allowed. But then what happens is that person's tendency for doing something that's pretty natural, which is to do this kind of, family outreach, keeping each other safe and warm, turns into an issue where it's a lease violation. And these folks over time, if they keep doing it, are asked to leave. So then that kind of then causes a whole nother issue in terms of that family member having ongoing safe housing. So I just thought that's worth mentioning. And then the other area where it's even more dire is Samantha talked about life expectancy. And there's just the reality that when people end up homeless, their life expectancy goes down even more than what Samantha was quoting. So in other words, there's other risk factors that come into play once a person's homeless. And I'll cover that in my presentation. But people are there's some categories where the average age of death is 47 years old among the homeless. So it's a real issue when someone loses housing.
Yeah, thank you. Jane had a question. What would be examples of disqualifying reasons?
So the denial, the CORI is kind of like a blanketed denial tool. So in the interviews, we've asked the 40-some folks, where they were denied. Some folks were told never, do not apply, and folks were also a fear of applying because they know they had a CORI. They were denied in the beginning of the process and to the point where their application finally comes up. And they were denied once they were at the top of the list. And we know that applying for housing takes years. So once you finally get to a point, you're denied there. And so there's so many spaces where it's at the discretion of the housing authority, but also know that for our advisory committee, we had housing authority partners at the table. We had legal aid at the table. We had community resources like New North Citizen Council and MOCA. So we were kind of learning from each other from the stories of what they are binded to do in providing housing. Also knowing that there's no affordable housing in our area. It's saturated, there's not enough. Learning about the barriers for people that are applying and knowing that, again, like I said, there's a pool of folks coming back out of prison and jails back to our communities, and they're stuck in trying to figure it out while there's already existing pools of people without criminal records still trying to find employment and housing at the same time. So it's just a saturated market where the doors are closed even more for folks with a criminal record than others, but it's still a closed door that leads to homelessness like Jay's talking about. And that slippery slope can lead to mental health related issues as well. So,
thank you. And I see Lizzie put in the chat that the DA's office is having an expungement and sealing record information session on October 7th.
Yes. And I emailed you the flyer, Becky,
Okay, great.
so people can take advantage of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we'll move on to the next speakers, and then if we have time, we can come back and ask Samantha more questions. I have Jay Levy first, and Jay, why don't you introduce yourself and who you work for, and
Sure.
Go ahead. Thanks.
So my name's Jay Levy. I work with Elliott CHS Homeless Services. I'm the regional manager, and I overlook several outreach teams that do work throughout the 4-county area of Western Mass. And I've been doing this work since the 1980s. So I myself, would be, I suppose, considered an elder at this point, about to turn 60 years old. And work started out in New York City, doing street outreach, made my way to Boston, working in shelters and vocational programs, out to Western Mass, doing outreach along the riverbanks, and then kind of did more supervision and overlooking of teams. And I got to say, in all the work I've done, there's nothing, more sadder and more of maybe a something that labels, I think, our community in a negative way, to see an elder out there just kind of stranded, whether it's in an unsheltered situation or even in the generic shelters where there's people of all ages, and it just doesn't seem like the healthiest environment for people by that age are really presenting with complex and multiple needs. There's the trauma people have, there's the medical concerns, there's the addiction, there's the mental health concerns. So there's a lot of what we call tri-morbidity in terms of many things that need to be addressed. And then you have mobility issues and things, that just pile on that make it almost impossible to give the person really what I would consider to be like trauma-informed care, where the person feels empowered and cared for. And on top of that, these elders are unfortunately usually separated from families. They don't have really the supports that they need. Now, there's a truth among the homeless that anyone working in the field will tell you, and that is, number one, the people among the homeless, they age faster and die younger. I mean, that's just the way it is, and there's some research to show that. But I'll tell you, in terms of my own kind of experience, is you'll see someone who's 50 years old and they look like they're 70, if they're living outside. I mean, it's that kind of a thing that you see that's really striking in terms of how fast people age when they're living under such harsh conditions. And there's been vulnerability studies done, and I'm just going to list one, there's many, that really looks at people in terms of mortality rates and premature death. And one was done by Dr. James O'Connell. It's called the Vulnerability Index that we use to help guide our outreach and to help keep people safe and to identify folks who are most at risk. And he did this on a study in the Boston area of 119 or so people who were unsheltered for 6 months or more, and found that people, first of all, 60 years and older, if they're unsheltered 6 months or more, were at high risk of death. If people were visiting emergency rooms consecutively for 3 consecutive months, they were at high risk of death. People had more than 3 hospitalizations in the past year were at high risk of death. People with cirrhosis of the liver, which is, this is what we find with people who are older and have been drinking for a long time. They're in that homeless population. They're at high risk of death, of course. End-stage renal disease, high risk of death. People with just a history of frostbite, immersion foot, or what I call trench foot or hypothermia, just a history of that, and living outside 6 months or more, are at high risk of death. HIV/AIDS, if you've been tested for that and you're positive, you're at high risk of death. And tri-morbidity is where I started with many of the elder folks that we meet, is considered, it's a medical condition, substance abuse or use and a mental health condition puts people at high risk of death. And what that means is over a 5-year period of time, 40% of the people in those categories died, and they all died prematurely. And the average age of death is 47 years old. And you can look at different mortality studies, and it'll range from about 46 years old to around 52 years old. You see the range in there for most people who are homeless. So this is really, on many levels, I think, a call to action. You know, we need to do more, and to see the fact that our communities allow people who are elders to be in this kind of situation, I think, is unfathomable. So one of the things we need to do, obviously, is to look at our outreach practices, our housing first practices. These are the initiatives that have kind of come out of these statistics to try to do better. And, you know, when we do outreach, it's all about helping those who are clearly in need, but often in a place where they're not expressing any need for help. So that's very relationship-based work. It's really doing the outreach. It's building the trust. That takes some time. That's what my outreach teams do. But then we want to be able to do our assessments and refer people quite readily to services and resources, including housing. And when it comes to elders, there's just a lot of barriers around that. And some of that's been discussed already. But I will say that, first off, a lot of the things we can easily access, like let's say more easily access, like a rest home or a nursing home facility or something along those lines, the elders we meet who are homeless, they don't want that. So it may be that they're a good candidate, let's say, for nursing home care. But to have someone voluntarily take part in that, or to go to a rest home where there might be a nursing component, that's not an easy match or a fix for the situation that we're finding on the streets. When we connect people to the ASAPs, are people familiar with the ASAPs, the aging services and access points that provide an array of services to people who have homes? They'll come in, they'll do the Meals on Wheels, they'll set up the home care, do all sorts of things. When we try to refer someone who's homeless to the ASAPs, we hit a lot of barriers with that. Often people say, and not every ASAP, but a lot of them, I'd say LifePath is a very good one. So I'll just say that's a really good one that's been helpful. But there's others that I won't name, but I'll just say, basically deny service to people. You know, they'll say, you don't have a residence. It's really up to the homelessness service community to serve you. And we're not going to get involved till you have an address. I mean, that's been kind of a message that we get, as opposed to the triage that we really need, that there should be an assigned caseworker, there should be immediate housing navigation, there should be prioritization based on age, nursing services offered. You know, all of this should be coming to the forefront. And instead, we're told, handle it within the homelessness service community. And so we try to do that the best we can. We try to prioritize people the best we can. Of course, we go to housing authorities. Of course, we get people on the list for elder and disabled, apartments and things like that. But it's really disappointing when you come across going through elder services, through elder affairs, things that are funded, particularly for elders, and we're being told our folks, for one reason or another, don't qualify, or if they do qualify, there's not this response that we can put into action that makes a difference in someone's life. So I'm being very quick. I'm just going through a lot of things quickly. Obviously issues with, prevention, and you probably know more than me on that in terms of how well the ASAPs and other services are involved in preventing homelessness, but that's clearly very, very important. When people are homeless, we look at decriminalization in terms of working with police departments, so people of color are not affected the way they are currently through, arrest and being unfairly incarcerated. And I think having discharge plans from these various institutions, whether it's the jails and the prisons or the hospitals, into housing with support services is ultimately the answer to a lot of this. And that's what's really lacking. We see the hospitals still discharging primarily to shelters, to the streets, and we meet people, it's just normal. We're doing outreach on the streets and we meet people who were discharged recently from prison. So as long as that's happening and those people are elders, there's a lot of special needs there. And it's very, very hard to fix in the mix, as they say. It takes time. Eventually we get hopefully a lot of these people housed, but the reality is we're also losing folks. People are dying. And it's high cost in terms of emergency service usage, hospitalizations, all the things that we end up spending our tax dollars on when it would be better to do more of the preventative approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I think we're going to do all these three speakers, and then we'll come back and do questions and answers afterwards. So next we have, but if you have questions immediately, put them in the chat and we'll come back to that. Next we have Jake Hogue from the Berkshire County Regional Housing Authority to talk about Tenancy Preservation Program. Jake.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. So as Becky said, my name is Jake Hogue from the Berkshire County Regional Housing Authority, but we have recently taken over the Tenancy Preservation Program for all of the Pioneer Valley and the Berkshires. So all four counties in the West are now in the same home. I'm the coordinator for the three counties that we've recently started providing services to, but we have been providing tenancy preservation services in Berkshire County for 16 years. So even though some of the faces are new out here, the services we're very familiar with. So as we start to, my staff and I start to get out, introduce ourselves to you all, please share what you do and how we can help you. One of the things that I think we've done best in Berkshire County is helping tenants that are undergoing housing issues and tenancy issues as it relates to age-related impairments. And that's really, I think, where our program helps this group the most. I just saw that in the chat, Lizzie. I absolutely will. We also help anyone with any kind of disability that is being evicted from housing. But as far as age-related impairments, that's where I think it's going to affect this group. So that can be anything from clutter to rent non-payment and everything else in between. As Jay mentioned, he set me up perfectly. It can also be that you have an illegal occupant. It could be somebody that just was incarcerated and didn't have a place to stay. And of course, you're going to let them in your home because it's family. So we're going to help save the tenancy and at the same time do it in a way that helps everyone. The key thing about, I think, the tenancy preservation program in general is we partner with the housing court as a neutral third party. And the goal is to preserve the tenancy. So we don't take a side one way or the other, but we are there to set up services to make sure that the tenancy is preservable and can move forward successfully. If for some reason the tenancy cannot move forward successfully, we would step in to help someone transition to the next step. So again, as far as age-related impairments, that would be a higher level of care, such as a nursing home or it could be something like a dementia unit. We would work with providers to make sure that person transitions to the best place for them and their ongoing care. We also our service coordinators, which is we like to make that distinction. We are not long-term case managers. We are service coordinators. So we step in, make sure services are in place, coordinate those services. So a lot of the same services, again, Jay mentioned maybe not being able to get in shelters because people have an address, we are able to do. So home cleaning, Meals on Wheels, mental health care, physical health care, anybody that is dealing, with insurance, we can be the ones that help them sit on the phone and manage that. The other thing that we're finding now, housing court is primarily online and on Zoom. And so we are stepping in and we are meeting people in their homes. All of my staff is equipped to do court from anywhere in the 3 counties. And so stepping in and helping seniors do that, we're finding has been an immense resource, both to the court so that people can appear on camera and really be able to speak to a judge and be represented or be able to represent themselves. And it also helps the tenant really feel a part of the process instead of having people make decisions for them. So it's a little overview of what we do. And I'll put my information in the chat, and any questions, as Becky said, we can do at the end. Thanks.
Thanks, Jake. And I saw a couple questions came through, but why don't we go on to Lizzie, and then we'll come back to these. Lizzie.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Lizzie Ortiz. I am the program manager for Revitalize CDC. We currently have several programs, but the one I'm working on is the Nutrition Flex program, specifically for patients referred by 5 different community centers in Springfield to provide services for patients that have diabetes concerns and medical issues. So I know a couple of people in this Zoom training, and I want to thank Becky for allowing me to participate in this, and also thanking everyone who has been doing this wonderful work in regards to homelessness. What I'm going to touch on is I've worked in the human service and the homelessness for 15 plus years, and for me is sort of educating the elderly on how to navigate the system that sometimes feels like it's a highway. It's very cumbersome. And sometimes they feel that there is a lot of doors that are sort of closed instead of being opened. And so I have been a strong advocate whenever I have been assigned to working with a specific patient or client. And so, when you do an assessment or an intake on elderly or anyone that in specifically, you want to make sure that you ask the appropriate questions, right? Do you have health insurance? Do you have food stamps, right? Do you have fuel assistance? Have you ever applied for fuel assistance? Do you know what that is? Are you a veteran? Are you connected to veteran resources in the community? One of the things that I always talk about is if someone is currently receiving food stamps, benefits through the government, SSI, SSDI, Social Security benefits, you want to make sure that you connect your clients to make sure that they receive that discount. They can receive a discount for their electric bill, their gas bill. These are things that sometimes people don't know that they can access these services, and really important in ways that they can save money because they are on a fixed income. One thing I always tell them as well is that for the homelessness, for people that are, in the homelessness world and they're looking for apartment, it's that make sure that these apartments, that heat and hot water is included. That's an additional expense that they may not be able to afford. And sometimes they're not asking these questions. So really, really, if you're an advocate out there working with the aging community, make sure you ask these questions, do a thorough assessment. Food insecurity is a major issue, right? And so make sure you connect them to the senior agency, such as Greater Springfield Senior Services, Western Mass Elder Care. Be really familiarized with who's who out there. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And whatever you learn, share it, right? I always say that I have a sort of a Rolodex in my brain about the agencies. And I know Jay is shaking his head because I've known Jay for quite some time. It's about knowing these numbers and becoming, having BFFs in the community. That's what I've always called them. My BFF at Social Security, my BFF in Housing Court, my BFF at the District Attorney's Office. all these agencies. So by the time, you become friends, colleagues, then it's easily for you to refer someone or connect them. And it's not just telling these patients or clients we work with, call this phone number. No, that's not how I do it. It's picking up that phone call and doing that phone call with them or on behalf of them. It's sending a text message or sending an email. It's doing the work, because I have seen that many agencies, I've walked into agencies and they have not even acknowledged the patient or the person I walk into, but they'll acknowledge me. Well, don't acknowledge me, acknowledge them. They're the ones that are in need, okay? So become familiarized with who is who in the community. That's one of the reasons I asked Jake, please share your information, because I am familiarized with TPP, who MHA had that service in the past. And I'm glad that they have it and they've been doing it for a long time. So also appeal. If one of your patients or clients are denied housing, the first thing you do is help them submit a letter to appeal their decision for housing. It could be because of past evictions. It could be because of CORI. It could be for a variety of reasons. They owed money at one point when they had a low-income apartment 10 years ago. Well, help them make these decisions. You're the advocate, you're the right hand, and you know who's in the community, and you want to make sure that you are doing the best for them. Advocacy is the really most important key in working with any population here, knowing what, behavioral sources are out there. Mental health, substance use, domestic violence, know the community, the social service agencies, who's at Catholic Charities, who's at Greater Springfield Senior Services, who is at Wayfinders, who is at the City of Springfield. The shelters, who are they? What is their criteria? If they tell them no, well, you pick up that phone call and you call Worthington Street Shelter and advocate why is it that this person is not allowed to go there. The Samaritan Inn, have a list and have a Rolodex of services in the community. It's important, and it is our job to do this. That's why we're here. That's why we're passionate about this. I'm very passionate about this, and I love this work, and I'm really thankful for having the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. That was great. And I'm really grateful for all of you who are here speaking and doing this work. It's really incredible. We had a couple questions in the chat. Haley, do you want to, why don't you say what your question is?
Hello. So I'm Haley Wood. I'm the director of the Hadley Senior Center, and we have a current situation with a client, a Hadley resident who will possibly be evicted, but she is involved with TPP, and she's had many hours of help from our outreach coordinator. And she has the ability to pay her rent, but she needs a little bit of help. But because of some resentments that she feels toward the family member who's willing to help, can't quite get herself to say yes to this and can't quite commit herself to actually paying a portion of the rent that she can afford. So she's making a lot of self-sabotaging decisions. And I do think I've seen this before in mental health problems. And we are out of ideas for helping her, and TPP is going to drop her as a client because she's on record as saying that she will not accept certain kinds of help or the solutions that they have proposed that could keep her housed. So I'm wondering about ideas for people with probably a trimorbidity that who are in a spot where making a decision that is self-preserving is not possible.
So, yeah, I can take that first, and then Lizzie and Jay, if you want to jump in. So we work with clients until the eviction is complete or until they begin refusing services. So that is a little bit about what you're speaking of, especially when a judge has mandated a certain service, and I think that's what's going on in this case, that is being refused. So as far as that goes, we are going to connect her to those services. And ultimately, she is the one that gets to make the choice whether or not to pick them up. The court does have leverage in certain ways, including a guardian ad litem, that if they feel that the tenant is unable to make those housing decisions for themselves, a GAL can step in. We also, and in this case, it may be an option to kind of lean on the family to get a bit more control over those finances. If again, a GAL or someone else feels that they are not able to make those decisions for themselves due to that trimorbidity that you spoke of.
Okay, does the client, is a guardian ad litem involuntary?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's the only course that could work here.
So, and it may, unfortunately, it may take another round of evictions. And because Massachusetts, especially right now, there is a lot of money for financial aid. So a lot of these cases are being brought to court as eviction for non-payment cases. And they are easily solvable because of the amount of money out there. So once they're solved, the court no longer has leverage. And therefore, TPP and other services also no longer have leverage. And I think that's where, once that money runs out, the court and therefore the GAL and other people have a little bit more leverage to help somebody that really is service resistant.
Yeah, I would just add that the court process, like you said, is used, as Jake mentioned, can be used as leverage. People are, getting raft benefits and other types of assistance for the financial piece. But then you have, I suppose, a certain amount of time to work along the lines of relationship building. But you'd have to find what agency can actually do that in terms of outreach in the home longer term, because it takes some time for that money to run out. So there may be a window through relationship building and engagement and connecting to that person's needs, wants, values, whatever it is, culture, and ways of helping, reframing the issue in a way where maybe they would consider getting some help, getting some counseling, getting a mental health consult, addressing addiction issues, getting help from medically. But usually it's more in the process of things coming up around the housing that allows us to point to the discrepancy in terms of their current behaviors and what the ultimate outcome might be, and help to motivate the person to look at that discrepancy to get some help. And then if that doesn't work, you have as a backdrop things like payeeship, going more of an involuntary route toward trying to help. So it's not none of it's easy. So it sounds like, oh, just do this. No, it's not like that. It's really a journey and a grind. But that's the work.
One thing that I wanted to mention is when you do an assessment to clients, and this goes to the CORI concern and barrier, if you know that when you're talking to one of your clients, help them pull a CORI record. This will all not educate them on what's on their record. It would educate you, and then it would bring you to know what's coming ahead, right? What barriers you're going to face with them. It's really important that we continue. And these are, you can get your CORI, if they're indigent, for free. So take advantage of those services out there. Educating our clients is the best tool because they in turn educate others around them. Another thing is that if you know that you're coming across that mental health is an issue or substance use, start working on that right away. Don't wait until you're in housing court to then realize that a mental health issues is one of the main barriers here. It takes a long time. It takes trust. We're strangers to these people. And you know that they tell us more than they tell anyone else. And so we become their partner in crime, so to speak, right? They trust us and they tell us things, that they've never shared with anyone. But that takes love. They need to know that they can trust you, that you're genuine, that you're just not there for the pay, because that we're not here for the pay. Human service workers make very little. We work very hard. So start making those assessments and those questions. It takes time. This is not something you do in 24 hours. Build that relationship. Okay. Connect your clients to someone that looks like them. Diversity. Saying someone is bilingual, bicultural is not enough these days. It's knowing the culture, right? And not saying, I know what you're going through. No, we don't. If any of us here haven't been homeless, we don't know what homelessness is. And if we've never faced substance use, we don't know that. So we can't say I really can relate to you unless you've walked the walk. And so they're going to know that whether you're fake or you're real. So be honest with them. Don't share too much about your personal lives, but begin doing those assessments early on as soon as you meet them. Build that relationship, and I'm sure you will be successful. And have a lot of faith and hope that, it's going to take a long time. I've worked with clients that have had many issues in the chronically homeless world. Years. So don't give up and don't take it personal.
Yeah, you have to be, Lizzie makes a lot of great points. You have to be very optimistic. And I think you hear in everything Lizzie was saying, how much joining you end up doing with the client, where you're both considering options together. And it's not about, telling the person this is the best route to do, or this is what you should do. It's really respecting their autonomy, respecting their power of choice, but really going on a journey with them. And that means actually being there, connecting, building the trust, getting to know them, and understanding their language base, kind of where they're coming from, what they value, what they want, what they need, why they won't allow a family member to help them. There's something important in there that they're expressing. So, those are the kinds of things that just takes time to do, unfortunately. And it's not about, there's very little we can do in terms of like fast food counseling fixes. It's really longer term relationship work, and then how that connects to all of the resources and services that can be available once the person's a bit more agreeable and sees. It's one thing if somebody of authority is saying, why don't you go use this resource? And it's another thing if it's someone who's like right beside them, who they care about, who they're connected to, who's saying, have you ever considered this? Let's look at this together. It's just a very different kind of resonance to it.
Thanks. And this is a really good discussion. And I think if it's okay with everyone, I think we'll keep going with this and skip the breakout rooms unless someone really wants to do them. But I think there's few enough of us that we can keep going with this. I did see a question from Kathleen. Is a supportive senior housing initiative supportive, effective, or expanded to Western Mass? And is CDC and CHCD the same? Anyone have an answer for that?
I think Jake should take this, especially because it's a TPP question.
Basically, I'm trying to update our resource guide, and I was looking through the housing and situation, and I don't have any of your names on here. So I would like to update my resource guide, which has a housing and homeless section. And I want to know if the information I'm putting in there is still current and what is better information. So that's the value of being here today. So
I actually don't know the supportive senior housing initiative, but I will ask up the chain and see. I'll find out a little bit more and get back to the group if no one else has an answer for that.
Yeah, one of the issues I'd also like to raise for consideration is in terms of resource development. So you have, this idea of prevention and TPP and what the ASOPs are doing and other things. You have the outreach to people who are already homeless and that kind of thing going on. But there is the issue of, like I said, we're meeting people who are homeless directly, in unsheltered situations or in crowded shelter situations, and it's a road sometimes to get to housing. So the question is, is there a safe space we can be bringing those people to immediately, where they can be building relationships and then working on options and have access to nursing services that may be needed. Kind of like safe haven programs for people who are chronically homeless, but maybe something geared for the elders we come across. Because, originally back in Boston, I'm going back many years, in the 1980s, there was a committee to end elder homelessness. And one of the things they helped to set up was some transitional apartments that was directly connected to different elder service agencies. I think Cardinal Medeiros might have been one of them. And we were able to directly get people off the streets into these transitional apartments. And then from there, people were looked at in terms of other supportive housing options, whether it was independent living, assisted living, nursing home care if they needed that level. It'd be nice to have some of those options more at our fingertips than what we have right now.
Janice, you had your hand up. Oh, you're muted. Oh, you're still muted. There you go.
Okay. I used to be the executive director of a company actually called the Committee to End Elder Homelessness, related to what Jay's talking about. It was started by a nurse, a social worker, a housing manager who had actually been in the government in DC, and some other advocates. And they actually started with a $50 honorarium that was given to Anna Bissonette. She's very well known as a speaker, and built the housing from there. The first building was an old building in Victorian in Brookline. Brookline in outside of the immediate Boston area. Then Boston Medical Center gave the committee a huge building for $1 that used to be a bread factory and became, I think we had close to 40 apartments that were gorgeous. And then a row house in Brookline. And then we set up a permanent housing with an old school. And I'm sure it's continued to grow. It's called Hearth now. But the important part that I remember was into support of what Jay is saying. And that's the important part of having a long-term relationship. So the outworkers who would go from our place into shelters, and all of the shelters could stay there for visiting frequently for months. And then someone would look at them and make eye contact because they were familiar. And then you'd start them on the journey to having a home. And it was permanent housing. The services happened because we were tied in with John O'Connell and Boston Medical Center. And a lot of the people had multiple problems, as Jay mentioned, mental health problems. Some had substance abuse problems. Many had medical problems. And some of the people I worked with have been on the streets for 32 years, up in the Commons primarily. One of them had been thrown out of every shelter in the city. She was utterly charming. But the whole notion of support and time are important. But it also worked because then HUD money was more available. So fundraising was made easier. People could live there, believe it or not, supported by the service, by the services for mental health, services from substance abuse groups, the medical supports from Boston Medical, and Social Security. And it covered, because Social Security alone would cover your living there, plus pocket change, as it were, about $300 a month. I say this because the good news is the outcomes were terrific. I think in the time I was there, I only had to ask one person to leave. And that's because the group in the community, we called them members of the community because they were, rather than tenants. I remember the housing manager said, "Why do you do that? And we got to have rules." I said, "No, not necessarily. We can meet as a community and discuss shared expectations of what we owe each other, living with each other." So that's the group called on me to get rid of this guy because he was dealing drugs from his apartment. A lot of people have the notion that homeless elders are bums, that they never did anything. Well, people who I can think of, 2 teachers, an epidemiologist, a social worker, other people who had hands-on, really skilled working jobs, and for a lot of reasons, mainly healthcare, I might add, going broke, ended up homeless. But the idea that it can't work is absurd. It can. But look at what I'm talking about, having access to funding from DC, having banks who will really support you, and there were many, having solid staff from the wonderful paraprofessionals from DMH programs and others. And I ended up being excited about what good things can come from it. And the only down experience I ever had was when we were showing donors around in the building. Now, this is an apartment building where everybody had their own apartment. People from companies would donate all the furniture as part of a gift. Gorgeous common rooms, cooking areas. And a donor was walking with me and she said, "Don't you think it's too nice here?"
Yeah.
I said, "Too nice? We're all human beings." So I wish some of that was serendipity because of Boston Medical Center and a whole lot of other things, and certainly the wisdom and vision of the founders. But we really can get permanent housing built if we can pull groups together who are passionate about doing it and not just thinking that an empty room somewhere will do. It won't. To get a life, you need other people's lives helping you.
And Janice, as you were saying, I must have known you back then because, I worked right alongside the DMH outreach workers in the Boston area. And I was part of Tri-City at the time, but we were joined together as an outreach team. Mm-hmm. And we were referring people directly to the housing you had helped develop. But I do remember some transitional units too. So it was a mix. In other words, we were able to move people that we knew well. Of course, it started, like you said, that outreach very slowly, in these different settings, getting to know people. But once we knew folks, we were able to move them on pretty quickly through the help of your resources that were developed. So it was a real godsend. So I thank you for that. And there is money now, a lot of money coming into the homeless world for resources and services. They're trying to figure out what to do with it. And I would suggest, like a subcommittee on ending elder homelessness and pushing for these types of answers is important. A lot of stuff has gone toward youth homelessness, which is very important. I'm glad we're doing it. A lot's been built up and it's fantastic. But there should be similar efforts for the elders. We have a chronically homeless population that's aging. That's the bottom line. All the baby boomers, that a lot of that segment is among chronic homeless when you break down homelessness, and they get all the medical issues and everything else that intersperses with it, and it's really tough. So we want to get these folks in sooner rather than later.
Well, my hat's off to you for all you guys are doing. I just think it's crucial. And yes, some of those hippies who had their bandanas in the 60s are now trying to get those bandanas to save them from the elements.
Yeah.
Do any of you know, are there similar types of housing or supported transitional housing in this area? Where do people get referred to around here?
Well, we have Lizzie can talk to this too. I mean, we have a whole coordinated entry system where we do by name lists and connect people to housing. But kind of my greater point is there's not a lot of housing within that system of any really that I can think of that's targeted specifically to elders, outside of going through housing authorities and getting on, prioritized lists, that kind of way. And so the housing that's being funded through HUD, that's connected through the continuum of care, where these monies reside, and then these permanent supportive housing programs are developed, and we're matching people off this by name list that outreach workers, people like Lizzie, are finding in the community, caseworkers, what have you, and they're doing vulnerability assessments, getting people on the list, or prioritizing them based on vulnerability and connecting them to housing. That's all good. But what's lacking, I think, is saying, like we did with youth, which is we developed our own coordinated entry system for youth with real good flexible dollars and resources and more housing and support services connected. I mean, that's in process. It's not totally resolved or anything. It's in process, but it's a very good thing that's happening. And I think there needs to be something like that, in my opinion, for elders.
I agree, Jay. We need to have a specialized coordinated entry for the 55 or the 60 and older. We focus on individuals, we focus on youth and veterans and families. But, as we are getting there, some of us, right, quicker than others, feels like, okay, I need to submit an application to the housing authority now, so then my name comes up, 15 years from now. So definitely, I think it's important for us to advocate. And I put on the chat Western Mass Network to End Homelessness. It's a blog. Sign up for it. Then you'll get a lot of reminders about all the committees. And, you're probably welcome. I'm sure you will be welcome to attend the individual committee, where there will be a lot of other service providers and advocates. And that's how you would bring the name of the person you're working with if they're homeless, or if they're at risk of homelessness, and there's an assessment that will be done, but it's the place to be. So I would highly suggest look at it, registered, and connect, so then you can be to continue doing your work. That it's amazing these days.
Thanks. And I'm looking to see if...
I missed, I think Kathleen left before I was able to answer her question about whether or not we serve seniors. So we wouldn't necessarily serve all seniors, but if there's any kind of age-related impairment, even if it's even if it's not diagnosed, we would step in and help. So we work hard, I think, to stretch the bounds of what a disability is. We will work with anybody that really is struggling with their housing to help them through that process. So even if sometimes we need to help them get diagnosed for a disability at the end of the road, that's fine if that's the goal. As long as we're working together to save someone's housing, we're going to try to do it.
Great. Thank you. Is there anyone else who has any other questions?
I have a question for Jake, just real quick. Where are you getting your referrals from in terms of, does it have to go through the courts? I know we call when we think somebody's tenancy is at risk, but officially, how does that referral process work for you?
Yeah, so I tried to put it in the chat, and for some reason it didn't let me. So I will email it to the group, but referrals are going directly through me right now. We are taking the majority of our referrals through the court system. But that being said, as we expand staff, once we're fully staffed, we are still continuing to hire as we are a new program. We will take tenants as far upstream as we can. So at the first sign of a problem, we'd love to get in there, build that relationship before it gets to court, because one of the biggest barriers that people face is that eviction record. And so if we can prevent them from even having that record through the court, we will do that. So I will make sure that this group has our referral form. And if it's maybe too far upstream right now and we don't have the staff for it, I will at least have a conversation with whoever sent the referral so that they know kind of the best next steps to take and when to reach out to us if it gets worse.
And you have a counterpart for Hampden County?
It's me for Hampshire, Hamden, and Franklin. And then, yeah, we do have Kim and Jeff are still out in the Berkshires. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, we're getting close to 3:30. I'm putting in the chat a link to a survey for a post-meeting evaluation. Are any of you Pioneer Valley folks staying for the implementation discussion at 3:30? Okay, good.
I have to go.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jay and Jake and Lizzie. It's been really great to have you here, and it's a really important subject, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And Lizzie, you're welcome to stay, but we're talking about implementation of age-friendly community stuff. So,
thank you, Becky. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Okay. So I thought it would be good for communities that are at the point of, doing these age and dementia-friendly community assessments and action plans, just to sort of compare notes of how implementation committees are forming or being appointed. And if you're thinking about like how many times they should meet. And I know I've been working with John in Belchertown and Corinne in Agawam and Jane in Hadley. And Hadley's just getting started with this, but Jane's on the select board, so I'm happy you're here.
That's a good connection to have.
Yeah. And I know Janice and Melissa have been working with the Hill Towns. So I guess it'd be good to just go around and see what you all are thinking now. And if I know what you're doing, but if you want to sort of from your perspective, what you think implementation of these plans will look like in your communities. And maybe go ahead.
Go ahead. I can just say what we've done in Belchertown so far. We've got an implementation committee formed. It has not met yet. The plan is to meet quarterly. Again, haven't had the first meeting yet, so I don't know what a quarterly is going to mean in terms of month and so on and so forth. I think the main step, your help was instrumental in getting that designation through the Board of Selectmen. And as you mentioned, it's going to be reviewed at the Planning Board. But that's pretty much where we're at. It's nothing has happened yet, but there is a plan there. There's a set of a series of priorities that we're going to be looking at. But again, we have to meet before we can start talking about who's going to do what about whatever. So we're just at that initial stage. So I don't know, but I won't say we're spinning our wheels. The wheels haven't even begun to move, I guess is the best way. But hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll be getting something going. And that's pretty much where it is now.
Great. Janice, you want to talk? You're on mute. I know you're talking.
I don't want to bore people, but I can share what the consortium's been going through. For people who aren't familiar with the group, it's 7 COAs up in the Puckerbrush up here in the hills, Cummington, Plainfield, Goshen, Chesterfield, West Hampton, Williamsburg. They're not in the Puckerbrush. They're in a nice neighborhood. But they still run into the same problems we do. Goshen, at any rate, 7 COAs. And we were lucky enough to get a grant from Elder Affairs to start modeling what a very, very rural version of an age-friendly initiative could look like. So we surveyed everybody in all over 60 in all 7 towns, and then collated all the data, and then had community meetings in most places. I think there's only one that didn't because of so many changes going on in leadership in town. And we helped people prioritize what was most important, and then also talked about what actions they would like to see. What would they recommend that we work on, and where they saw the town currently, their town. A lot of information came from that. And then we applied with AARP, World Health Organization, to become part of that network, which is where we are. Being rural makes implementation a particularly interesting challenge because, most of the, I think all of the select boards in the hill towns are very part-time. Ours only meets every other week. Most of the COAs have very limited resources in terms of staffing. The plus side, however, is in rural areas, more people know each other personally than they otherwise would. So identifying people who are vulnerable is a little easier sometimes because the grapevine is strong. People, you make fun of the grapevine, but it yields a lot of grapes and we can get stuff done. So each community has had different groups under different names, but say, an example, in Chesterfield, the part of the team was a select person, someone representing the church. Some of the people were on the board of the COA, and some others were volunteers who were interested. We got slowed down, and you've heard this story almost in every corner these days. The pandemic really slowed things down when it comes to making connections. What became clear to the consortium, however, is in terms of action plans, which we had, there's no way itty-bitty groups in rural towns have the wherewithal to write big grants and get big funding. It's a very, very difficult. And COA directors are shredded already. But we did tie up, and this is part of it, with other groups and the CDC, the collaborative, working also with James and getting a lot of help there, and trying to figure out how this little think tank or the think tanks in little towns can anastomose into stronger networks for getting help to roll out the implementations that they need. So several of the hill towns already have had part of the walkability grants and have had street audits, and it'll be followed by looking at some of the options for improving things. But it's not going to be so easy because a lot of town governments don't even know what some of the needs are of older people, even when you show them the information. The irony is they're often older people themselves, but still see the elderly as somebody else. So you have to work through that, but most of them aren't clear how important the COA is. They think of them, so you must have monthly luncheons and play bingo. Well, no. So I think integrating with groups such as the Pioneer Valley and other groups and other sources of funding will allow us to be down in the weeds, doing the smaller things that larger initiatives may not see the roads to because they don't live there. And there are some peculiar roads in the country when you go to hook people up. I talked to a fellow the other day who was complaining about the dangerousness of our only main intersection in town and having trouble connecting positively with the select board. So I told him what we were doing and what the walkability is all about. And next thing you know, he's volunteering to help with data collection, writing grants. And I thought, oh, when can you come over? So it's happening, but with, I wish I could capture in words the tentacles that are often invisible until you start working with trying to get something done. Does that make sense, Becky?
Yeah, that was great. Did you present your action plan to the local select boards, or what was your?
It went to AARP, and the select board signed off on all of the plans. So up to this point,
Okay.
I haven't shared the specific issues because one of the select people is on the planning group, but we will. And part of my hesitation to concretize a lot of things is I need to get these networks in place so I can answer questions when select board members or taxpayers are saying, well, how are you going to pull that off? Because one of the goals is to get people to yes and avoid every yes, but how come? And it's working, but I can't predict in each town how successfully any of us will be able to make headways. But the fact is, with other partners, we're a little more visible. And the rest is hope, I think. But you offer a good thought, Becky, and I might pull out that work plan, and then you have to put it in words that people will read. Because a lot of grant kind of stuff with work plans are overwhelmingly detailed. I looked at some of the larger areas on the age-friendly initiative, and I think, oh my God, I wish I had a grant writer for the consortium. We just would, it's a do-it-yourself show. But you make a good suggestion, and I'll talk with the group about it.
And you meet as a consortium, or are you talking about the Chesterfield group specifically, or how often does the consortium meet?
The consortium meets every month.
Okay.
For the smaller groups, it's been hard for all of us to get people together because of all the restrictions. And frankly, not a lot of people are wild about Zoom. And up here, frankly, we couldn't have done it anyway. We just got broadband a few months ago. So even if you tried to do it, you were talking to yourself sometimes. But so it's I'm going to pick your brain, Becky, about how to make those kind of connections. Because if you look at the literature on what's called rural, there are numbers much higher than we have. We're talking 1,200 people, 800 people. So we're facing some challenges there, but it's moving. Maybe with the speed of a receding glacier, but it is, well, I shouldn't say that. They're going fast these days.
I think
do you have anything you want to add? We may have lost her.
Oh, Melissa, are you there? We have lost Melissa.
She may be answering the phone or something.
Yeah.
I forgot to add this, that we're starting the dementia friendly, adding on some of those work plans and putting more information in the newsletters we have up here, which go to over 2,200 households. So that's something people read. The more readable we make it, the more they'll read it. So on that dimension, I figured I'd write a personal story about what I've been going through with mild cognitive impairment, and hope it's a way to get people talking more. And I have gotten some pretty good feedback, and we're putting material together now that will be put in the next newsletter about how you distinguish normal aging from other impairments and why it's not all called Alzheimer's and so on and so forth. But again, this is on a tiny scale of widening that door to dementia. Liz says her microphone isn't working.
Oh.
She can hear us, but she can't talk.
Okay. And Corinne why don't you give an update, Corinne? I guess we have to leave, so.
Oh, I probably talked too much.
That's okay. I think it's incredible what you all have done just on your own as rural towns. It's really great.
I'm very impressed by what you're doing there, because I am going to get interrupted in a minute. But so at Agawam, our plan isn't really finalized, right? And we haven't presented it to the mayor officially and to the council. So we're, and then we'll be looking at how we're going to put a group together to work on it. But one thing I wanted to say was that we had a meeting with the mayor today about some stuff about housing, and he said there's not a day goes by that he doesn't get a phone call from a senior looking for help. I mean, the housing situation for seniors, I know it's not just Agawam, but we have such a hugely growing senior population, including me. And so, yeah. and so it's just, and the thing that's really a challenge is that there just is not money available for senior only housing. It isn't there. It just isn't there. And I say not all seniors want to live only with other seniors, but so if you're able to develop, like we're having Wayfinders do a development Rosewood Way, there's going to be 21 bedroom apartments, which kind of organically likely will be for seniors, but it's such a challenge because, and it's great that the governor is taking housing much more seriously and is very committed to family housing. But, for one thing, to understand that if you can help seniors to downsize in an affordable way, guess what? Families can buy their house for housing for families, So I don't know the answer, but I know I've always known it's a problem. And I mean, he literally said there isn't a day that goes by that he doesn't have a senior calling him, asking at least one for housing help. I don't know what. We
had a senior housing committee going here in Chesterfield for 20 years now. And we worked with the CDC. There's not money. And then they suggest you build these buildings that would be so peculiar in the country. And I'm sorry to say, but this is rural life. At one point, we did have a place, we did have the money and all of that, and the voters turned it down. 10 years later, we're still at it.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Sorry. Okay.
Well, we need to get Agawam submitted to the mayor, that one. Yeah, go ahead, Corinne. Jane, you had a question about, the percentage on the surveys in the hill towns. Janice, do you know how many surveys you've got back?
Oh, gosh, I have a report, so if you get in touch with me, I can get it. But it was a hefty return rate, better than you usually get. I think it was up in the 30% or somewhere in that area. But I was impressed. What was even just as interesting is the similarity of responses in each town. Communication figures in a large way. Transportation, that goes without saying in rural areas. Access to services. The whole business of the of livability around walking and being part of the community. So none of them are a real surprise. But if anyone's interested in the report, I can get on my computer and get it to you.
How long did you have your surveys? How long did you collect them for? How many months?
Oh, goodness. It wasn't that many months. I can get that too, but it didn't take long. It took long to adapt we use the AARP survey, but we had adapted it some to rural settings so people wouldn't become incontinent with laughter looking at some of the items that were only for cities. And you know, the references to them continue because they have to. I mean, they're for real. One of the things that helped us in doing the survey is when COVID hit us, it was very clear that the access to health services and particularly food, you know, the access to food. So we did some exciting things around that in the hotels, and that was great. It feels good to see some products come out of all this planning, even though they're not earth-shaking.
When you did your action plan, Janice, did you have, was it sort of thinking about 5 years, and was it sort of very focused, or how many types of?
I think we looked at it for going forth for a couple of years, because we were in the middle, and we still are to some extent, of making those connections. And one of the things that consortium leaders have found to be a real issue is a broader issue, actually, that comes up in small towns. And that's developing the importance of developing those concrete relationships with the municipal leaders, and the finance committees. You got to learn how to like finance committees. And since I was on one, it was easier to give some hot tips. And the independence that we so value can get in the way when you're trying to develop initiatives. So I've seen some improvement. The church here, and I think in many small communities, is a really key part of that network. But you know, this problem has been a problem with councils on aging forever. You know, where the Older Americans Act says you're the grassroots organizations, but they don't always get that much support. It's sort of quaint to think of us as grassroots, but some of us only receive funding for sand, not grass.
What else? Anyone else have any thoughts or questions for all of you? I guess, John, Belchertown, you know, we had been meeting monthly. You guys may want to meet more frequently in the beginning just to sort of keep it rolling. I don't know.
Well, again, I think again, we got it through the board, select board, but now, you know, bringing in the, the planning, get them on board, because one of the members of the implementation group is on the planning board. So I think that's an important the element, if you will. I will say this, some of the things that were actually already happening independent of this, in the sense of walkability. That if you've been on Route 202 State Street, going west from Belchertown Center, that's totally torn up because they're extending sidewalks down there. So actually, I'm thinking, since I live on the other side of the hill, I might end up walking to COA meetings because I can walk up on the sidewalk to the center of town, walk down the sidewalk to the senior center, and then walk back around again. I've got sidewalks. And, that's the advantage of living in the center of town. But it's that just I think it really enhances some of the things they're doing with making it more pedestrian friendly, at least in the center of town. Now, Belchertown geographically, I think, is the second largest town community in Massachusetts. Well, some of it's water, of course, but once you get outside the center, there's nothing. There's nothing. Yeah, but in the center, which is why when my wife and I decided to move to Belchertown, because this is where our daughter and grandchildren are, we wanted to live in the center so we can walk to stuff. And that to me is like a form of personal planning. Living in a suburban house, selling the house, moving to the center of town, can walk to Stop and Shop, walk to CVS, walk to the package stores, walk to restaurants, walk to CVS. It's all walkable.
And I like your center of town.
And the stuff that happens on the common there. So the Belchertown Fair got canceled for the second year in a row, but that community connection is just an ideal. So I'm looking at it again. My circumstances are different than a lot of other people, but I chose to live in a location where services or access to, again, shopping and the needed things are readily accessible. There's even a bus stop, a PVTA bus stop at the end of my street. But the point of the matter is that was a choice. And, I think, I can understand someone wanting to stay because I've got a friend who lives up in Conway who doesn't want to move, lost his wife, and now he's just living all alone. But he doesn't want to move because he likes where he lives.
Yeah.
But there's nothing there for him.
Yeah. Well,
back in I used to be the director of planning for Central Mass Agency on Aging before I retired. And I just remember one of the board members there, advisory council members, she said she and her husband who had spent their working lives down in the DC area. When it came time to retire, they wanted to move back to Worcester because they had Worcester connections, but everything was readily available. They had hospitals, they had medical care, easy public transportation. You can get to anything you need is available. And again, it's planning for a time when you can't do stuff for yourself anymore.
Yeah.
And, different people make different choices. But I sort of look at it, the best you can, put yourself in the best possible position, be proactive, work on your own behalf. So I'm an advocate for that because that's what I did. But, again, that doesn't mean that doesn't meet everybody's needs. I don't generalize for myself.
And I think it's important to have those discussions with the broader community because I'm dealing with this my own family. My parents made the great decision to move to a condo in Gloucester where they can walk to everything, and they're across the street from a grocery store and a train station, And then my aunt and uncle in northern rural Vermont are 94 and 80 with oncoming dementia and don't want to move. And it's, it's such a complete contrast. And they just had never thought, they hadn't planned, they like where they live.
Well, that's part of me working in elder services for 26 years, recognizing you're going to reach a point where you need to make some changes. And so that was a very, very much a factor in what we decided to do.
Yeah.
How many of us, John, have been in the elder business for a long time?
And I will tell you this, I never thought I would ever be working in that field. But basically, I wanted to make a change, and that was a job that was available, and I took it and ran with it. And for 26 years, I was dealing with elder services planning. My background is I was a health planner back when they had health planning back in the late 70s and early 80s.
I had this fantasy that I could do a survey of all COAs and ferret out who have been in the aging industry anyway for a long time, and how many of them are nurses, because there are many, and how many social workers and in the helping professions. It's amazing to me.
Right.
And what I'm enjoying hearing about is the growing numbers of attorneys who are now joining in and helping out. And I think, don't talk to us about the frail elders. We're the rocks.
Well, yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's, going forward though with this implementation group, again, I'm just one of many here. And to a large extent, I think it's going to be directed by Jessica, who's our senior center director. She's a very, very capable person. I just think she'll provide. See, my background is planning, not implementation. To tell you the truth, I'm the one that analyzed the data and said, okay, these are the needs, and that I reviewed the grants and said thumbs up or thumbs down on Older Americans Act funding. And actually, CMAA did have. We always made sure that at least some money was going to councils on aging. Granted, we had 61 to deal with, but that was an important thing.
Yeah. You gave me a good idea. Maybe the next step for the consortium is to move from the local groups, which are hard to get together, and have a regional planning group.
I would say that would make it easier for it. The other thing too, just as an aside, I'm putting on my grant reviewer hat here.
Yeah.
When grant writing is not difficult. It's like answering a series of essay questions and whatever. But in high school, even, for goodness sakes. But what you want is you want to have data. You want to have numbers so you can say, demonstrate a need and demonstrate the capacity to address that need and have clear connections of who's going to do what and that sort of thing. And that's, you're selling a product, if you will. You're selling your consortium, you're selling your agency or organization, whatever. And if you've got and answer all the questions. And so many times there's a 3-part question. People would answer part 1 and part 2 and forget about part 3. Read the questions and answer every part of the question. You'll have much better success that way. Again, have some data, have some information, statistical numbers that you can use to present. And if you've got the survey there, yeah, that's the ideal stuff to work from, particularly if you got something like a 30% response rate is actually pretty high.
Yeah, it is.
For surveys, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
And again, you'll also you could probably, from the councils on aging, if you keep any kind of statistics in terms of the types of questions that people have, problems that people present, then you have, again, some more statistics, how many people showed up with housing issues, for example, how many people showed up with transportation issues, and that sort of thing. Putting that information together can really help sell your project, you sell your grant. And
I agree, writing the text and the goals and then when it comes to how much is this going to cost, that doesn't take just a moment.
No, that does not. You have to be realistic too. Also, look at how much money are you likely to be able to get, and can you do the project within those confines? On the one hand, on the other hand, maybe you can't do everything, but maybe do a piece of it. And that gets you started, because that gets you in the loop. That gets you on the stage, if you will. So now you can play the game and then get another grant and this sort of thing, build off of a successful. And once you start writing successful grants, it sort of builds on itself, or it can anyway.
Yeah. Yep. It does.
Yeah. And
your partnership with the Hilltown CDC, that's really important too, because I know they do a lot of grant writing.
Oh, yeah.
I really think that Hilltown, that consortium end of things for small communities, that's really the best way to approach it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're getting to 4:00, so this has been a great discussion. I appreciate you all for staying. And maybe we can do this again. Keep
Another
supporting everybody. Yeah.
I love comparing notes like this. It really
Yeah.
is helpful.
Yeah.
It was just great to hear from all of you, and we'll get there. We'll get
Yeah.
there.
We are lurching toward victory.
Yeah, there we go.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Well, Janice, I will see you tomorrow, and hopefully Melissa can join us. I don't know if you've talked to her yet, but
I sent her a chat and she said she'd love to.
okay, great.
Well, that's good. You'll like her. She's a very sharp person.
Okay.
I'm lucky to have her as a pal.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Okay,
All right,
take care.
bye.
Bye.
We'll see you soon.
Okay.